Queers. Today we are talking to John Solis, who worked on the documentary Speaking Out. He was the director of this wonderful documentary touching on some really great subjects, but we'll get into that soon. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you, Kaitlynn. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. It's nice being here. I'm excited. It's finally out. So we did our premiere June 1st. So obviously, it was like a little bit of releasing it into the world and see what it does. But I'm hoping it gets to. I mean, like I said, more than anything, creatively, I think I wanted to do its rounds for cinematic purposes as well as more creative jobs, but more than anything that it gets into the right hands and into the right viewers in order for them to kind of, I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot of people out in the world that need some healing, you know and everyone goes through a journey. So I'm hoping, whoever gets to see it, it kind of takes a little bit to go that healing path.
Absolutely. And we all could use some healing, like you're saying. For those that are listening at home who may not know or be familiar with the documentary, can you let them know what Speaking Out is about?
Yeah, Speaking Out is a documentary on sexual assault, rape, and suicide. And it gathered three brave gentlemen, who is Jose Ramos Rig, Rush, and Charlie Harding. And they talk about their stories and what, you know, for each of them, it's very different. With Rig, it was a long period of time. Abuse more mentally throughout his family and religion, that it kind of pushed him to try to even think or maybe attempted suicide. With Charlie, a drink was put on him 20 years ago, and he was raped, and you know it took him 20 years to kind of gather all the information where everything flooded back, and then realize that he needed to do something about it. And with Jose, it happened in a more short term like scenario, and it was like a one night happened, which technically it happened in San Francisco. And um and he says that basically, like, after that, it was just kind of everything just happened so quick that it took him about he says that it took him about like a year to kind of realize that he actually needed to get help and do something about it, because it was eating him up. So I mean, they're brave stories. They're sometimes harsh in the sense that, as a society, we don't maybe want to hear details sometimes of it. But I think when we created Speaking Out, I felt like we needed those details to be told in order to bring uncomfortable conversations up.
Yes, I love when films have like a bigger motivation than just the film, like trying to make a difference basically, and it was very beautifully done.
Thank
How
you.
did the idea for Speaking Out come about?
Actually, it's really funny and kind of extensive in the sense that 2019, originally the project was going to be a complete different documentary. We were going to do something on the timeline of the LGBTQ, where they were then and where they are now. And I gathered my team. We were getting information, and as we were trying to do the timeline, we came with a common denominator that the LGBTQ always has something in common, and that is we fight. We fight. For whatever the reason is, we're always fighting for something, whether it's for gay marriage, whether it's for equality, whether it's to end AIDS, whether it's just like we're always constantly trying to fight, a small battle. And even now, I think, we're still fighting like certain scenarios. But we did all the research, and I think it was like towards the end of 2019, we got axed by the producers who actually produced Speaking Out. And it was for various of things. It was for HBO bringing out Equal, I think it is, which is a 4-part documentary, which was beautifully done as well. Um, and so I was a little bummed out, to be honest. As a creative, I was like, what now, right? Like, and time was happening. And I think the beginning of 2020, we got shut down. We all got put in a box and we're like, do not move. So everything was just so uncertain, life wise, creative wise. We didn't know where we were standing. And I remember that we sat in a meeting, and uh, Michael Weinstein, who is the AHF founder and president of AHF, he came into the Zoom, and we were all very much like in PJs and like in t-shirts, which was funny about it because that's what the pandemic brought. We would take those Zooms in just whatever clothes we had. So um not that I didn't take it seriously, it was just more the fact that I was kind of shocked there was so many people talking about what was going to be happening with the documentary. And Michael came in and said we should talk about trauma. And I think my body went into a little bit of a shock, and I started kind of shivering. I obviously didn't want to like tell them anything, but I was very against it, to be honest. I was like, yeah, let's pick another subject, or trauma could live over there, and I could live over here, and we'll all be good. And um, eventually they were like, no, this is the subject we want to touch about. And then everyone in the Zoom, or at least a very big percentage, decided to say, yeah, I think this is a great topic. And originally it was going to be a docu-series because they wanted 5 gay men to speak, and we wanted to do a docu-series on what it was. But we started talking about it, and I had a lot of issues trying to grasp onto the subject, and I didn't know why. But it wasn't. I think it was sooner than later. I have my own therapist, and I talked to her and I said, hey, they changed my subject, and I was very mad as a creative. I was like, no, I already had the research. Like, we should stick to that. And she stopped and said, could you maybe be a little afraid of what it's going to bring up in you? And I paused, and I said, oh shit, you're right. I'm scared to talk about it because I myself went through a very huge trauma scenario that I dealt for 20 years. And so I was against it because I didn't want to face myself. I was still very early in my age to actually confront it. I mean, in my healing journey, to confront it. And I talked about it with friends. I had, um, the emotional part of it, and then I had the work aspect of it, where we had to keep going with the project. And so I was having like an internal battle of like, should I just give it up to someone else? Should I keep on working on it? And once I grasped onto the subject, and once I understood that it had a lot to do with me as well. I ended up getting a little bit more enamored by what this project was. And creatively, I think that's when my creative juices started to flow and started saying, okay, how can I hear stories that could be off the wall? And how can I put these interviewees in a set that brings peace and comfort, and that they're able to speak out to the camera without being judged, without being, feeling anxious. And I remember that I told somebody, I was like, I think we should create a set with some lamps. And the reason behind with the lamps is that on top of that, each lamp we got at a thrift store. Mainly, we went out looking for the lamps, and so I think one or two were the only ones that we bought somewhat new. But the thing behind it is each lamp had lived in a different house at some point, and the shit that they might have seen or that they have gone through, like, brought like this metaphor of, like, we don't know what the story behind each lamp is, and I think that that's what we were trying to do. But when we turn on the light on each lamp, like, there's a little bit of hope, and that's what the light represents. There's like a light at the end of the tunnel. So I wanted to create that for the interviewees. I wanted them to sit down, and I think with that started coming up more on how we were going to do the reenactments and how we were actually going to put it together. um, I ended up hearing, about 150 stories. These three gentlemen, because originally there were five. Like I said, we still have two stories that we have on the back burner, but these three gentlemen were not the first ones. We listened to a lot of self tapes, and that's when I was like, oh, I guess I'm not alone, because during my trauma, I think that's what I thought. I was like, I'm the only one that's going through this. Nobody else is going through shit. Like, nobody went through what I went through. So my mind, to see all these people come out and try to talk about what they had gone through, whether it was during childhood or, during their teenage years. And then it also surprised us that a lot of people in their adult lives had gone through trauma. And, that's when you're supposed to have more control of your life, as an adult. You're supposed to do that. So I think that's how it all came together. At that moment, we knew that we just had to push through. But like you said, Kaitlynn, I didn't want to go the typical documentary routes. We wanted to beautifully tell it, visually. And I have a DP who, like, I'm infatuated to work with. I worked with him in about three small projects before we jumped into the documentary. And I mean, as you guys have seen, his photography and his vision, is also, I'm that type of person where I'm like, Keelan, and he's like, I got you. I'm like, but I haven't said. He's like, I know what you're thinking. And then I get to it, and then I see it, and I'm like, you get my vision, and you're enhancing whatever creative juices you are. So bringing that type of team into the whole thing was also very important for me, and obviously it was reflected in the documentary. Now that it's done, but that's how speaking out was pretty much born. It was born through pandemic and through a matter of conversations at a very uneasy time.
I absolutely love the insight about the lamps. Like that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, it's
That's what our podcast in general loves.
Yeah.
we we when I say we, but uh, there was times where I was with a brush painting the sets, but I enjoyed that, like we picked up lamps. We also picked up branches for where the therapist sat, for the
Oh
big tree
yeah.
behind it. So there was a lot of like heart and thought put into every little piece, that you guys see throughout the documentary.
Yeah, it definitely seems like this project not only is meaningful for others but was very meaningful to you. How was the process of creating and sharing the documentary? How did that affect you, like personally and professionally?
You mean sharing it now that it's out,
Yeah, well, just like
or
going through the creative process and then now sharing it with the world.
oh, well, going through the creative process, like I said, it was a lot of fun. Creatively, like you're talking my language, like anything creative. I'm that type of person. I'm like colors. I'm kind of like Dory in a way. Where I'm like colors. Oh, here, there. Like I'm grabbing all kinds of stuff. But at that time, like I said, I did have a little bit of a battle because it was, I was going through my own journey and then dealing with like working creatively, and because of my trauma, did not know if I was actually going to do a good job with it, even though I knew that creatively I could. But I think, like I said, I think it was halfway. I wouldn't say halfway through it. I think I needed to merge those two things, my trauma and the creative side. I think once I did, um, I you know this is a there's this analogy that I use. The thing with also speaking out is that it was such an ugly project, and I'll elaborate on that. Um, so I always say this. I felt for a moment that I had a piece of turd on my hand, and I know that's makes sense. And because it smelled bad, it was something very raw. It was just I didn't know how to grasp onto it for a little bit, right? And as we started creatively working on it, I would see like little flowers blossom, through that piece of turd, and it grew in front of my eyes. There was a point where we had to, ask for a little bit more money for the budget just because of how it was growing. But we weren't hesitant to do that just because we knew from the beginning of how powerful, like it was just growing in front of our eyes. And I think at that moment, I realized that it was, and it has been my baby. Like it's been, I've gotten to take care of it, love it. I've learned a lot from it. I also do say that speaking up had a lot to do with my healing. In general, like it helped me heal. And I think that's so powerful. I think that's why I'm so focused that whoever sees it is going through some stuff, that it does help, because it ended up helping me. Um, like I'll get into this probably later, with some questions, but um, I don't have anxiety like as much as I did, when I was going through my trauma. So, for me, that's like better than $1 million. Just so what it represents now that it's out, I'm just hoping that it does, that people get to see how, I think, giving myself credit, how beautifully, I created something with my team. But I also hope that they appreciate that there's this message underneath all this, that people, you need to start paying attention to their inner emotions and whatever they're going through. But I really, really have a special, special, special spot for speaking out.
I love that. You can definitely tell how passionate you are about this project and how meaningful it is to all of you. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced while making this documentary?
I mean, if we're talking production wise, money was one, like it always is in a lot of productions. Um, our budget was super low at the beginning. Like I said, our budget was 30,000 to start off with, and that went out the door really quick. And so we started talking to people regarding how we could get more money, and then we were a little bit afraid to bring it up to the producers. And then once we did, they got on board. That was one of the big ones. The second one, I think, creatively, is how were we, as a director. I think my biggest challenge was how could we tell these stories as raw as possible, but still beautiful enough for people not to walk up and leave the audience or the movie theater, or just that. And for the longest times, we just didn't know how we were going to create that, especially a lot of the rape scenes, or the sexual assaults. And I spent a lot of time looking at documentaries, and I did a lot of research and how it was told in some other ones. I also, one of the biggest documentaries that had a kind of like an impact creatively in this, in a sense, was before I started filming, the documentary that I'll be gone in the dark, right? I'll be gone. I think I'll be gone in the dark, or I'll be gone in the night. It's on HBO. It's about the Golden State Killer, but it's told by Michelle McNamara, who is also a writer, and she did an awesome book, and she's married to Pat Oswalt, the comedian, which I was not aware of. But when I saw the documentary, it's such a harsh topic too, and it's very eerie. And it talks about back in the day when a killer used to hunt its prey, and there was no cameras, and they would look through windows, and how they visually were able to create that. But on top of that, I'm assuming HBO's producers as well, but they there was this poetic essence to that whole documentary, and it's a 6 part or 7 part documentary, but it also like showed the survivors, and it interviewed them, and they conversed about what they went through, the emotions, they relived the moment. And so that was kind of impactful when I saw it. And I was like, if I could apply just a little bit of all that to speaking out, I think we got something, but challenging. I think that's what was more challenging to me, besides the money, how to tell people stories and not make them vulgar or grotesque, or you know nails on a chalkboard where you're like, ah. But yeah, I think that was the most challenging part of it.
Yeah, I can definitely see that because, like you mentioned at the beginning, just hearing like we're gonna focus on trauma, like the initial response is, "Ooh, do I even want to like dip my toe into that?" But the film came out so beautifully because of the angle that you chose to tell it from, and like many of the choices that were made. So when you were creating the documentary, what were some of the artistic or technical choices you made to ensure like this remained authentic and powerful, like with your vision?
Creatively, the first thing I think I came up with was a color palette. I wanted kind of like a vintagey feel to it. I don't know if you guys got that aspect.
Oh yeah, with the TVs
But
for sure. The TV like
yes.
honed that in, and the sound, like yeah.
And I wanted just and I don't know if this is relevant, but like for instance, in the way that I kind of perceived it, in a sense, and why I chose a little bit of the vintagey, besides me being fascinated with a lot of vintage stuff, but I my trauma happened in 2021. So like I said, it took 20 years to like kind of cleared, and I felt that I have grown, or so much stuff has happened since, so when they would, or when my therapist and throughout my healing, they would say like, look back at what happened, I would find it like so very far away, like long long time ago. And I was like, that's like back in like the 60s and the 80s, like just in my head it would bring like that. So I started seeing a lot of vintagey like aspects of it. That's why, hence the lamps. I wanted it with French, or with a certain kind of contrast, and I wanted every single one to be kind of different. The color palettes, I wanted to incorporate it with a lot of like the sets, the oranges and like the auburns, and so creatively, that's how it kind of came about. But I also, like I said, I sat down with Keelan, and I talked about, hey, what about using underwater cameras? That was also creatively like something that I wanted to show, because of how Rick spoke about water. I didn't know how else we could talk about potentially drowning, and I was very lucky that um, I did feel like a kid at one point where I was like, I want this camera and this toy. And, there was sometimes where like, no, you can't have it. And I was like, but I want it. And luckily they're like, okay, okay, we'll get to the camera. Just stop, But it was, I think creatively, that's how it all came about. It's very personal, I think it's very personal to me. I think that's why the attachment with all this.
I'm so glad you got the camera.
Yeah.
I would love to see what you could do in general with like an unlimited budget.
Oh my god, I would die. I mean, it crosses my mind all the time because I've seen speaking out many, 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 many times throughout the editing process from cut one to how it is now. And I would turn around to my editor and I would be like, Jason, if we had this, and he's all stop. He's all just stop. So, my mind could go very, very like, I think, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but, they say that dreamers are the best. And I'm always like, but we could do this. And, like, I know sometimes I'll say this, I think I was lucky enough for my team to let me play with a lot of the toys that we got, like the underwater camera. We shot with, for the interviews, we shot with two Aries, with two mini Alexas, which never in my wild life as a creative thought that I would have like two mini Alexas. I thought I was just gonna have like a one Sony kind of camera that was gonna be on set. But when they came in, it was just I was so fascinated. And then for the reenactments, we shot with red cameras, and one of them was a helium because we did some slow mo. So I had these powerful toys, obviously very costly, but that implemented for me to jump off the charts and do more creative stuff as I went, as I actually went through the whole creative process. And I was lucky, with the matches, we had a micro lens, it was like a very thin lens that could capture, very, 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 very like close-ups of things that you would be doing. And I was on the ground striking the matches, like for an hour trying to get, perfect shots. And, I got to play with, I mean, I don't know if there's no production people around there, but, we did something illegal with the fire. We got Bacardi 151 and we put it on a table and we lit it on fire. And, that was, like our kind of rebellious time in that aspect. But sometimes for a fire, you need to have a fire department there, and stuff like that. That supervise. So, like I said, I was lucky to have a very controlled environment creatively, but everybody helped me out. Whether it was bringing a lens or finding a lens or bringing a camera or how about we do this, like everyone was very hands-on involved, and I couldn't be more happier.
You're making me jealous. I really want to play with these toys as well. I always wanted to use that the
The
long
micro
lens.
lens,
Yeah, oh my gosh.
it's a lot of fun. That we tested it. I mean, I think at one point we tested it like your typical putting it in the mouth and see how like, and then pulling out just to see like what it grabbed from,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, like I said, to other people, it might not be. They're like, well, it's just a lens, and like, but once you start seeing what things could do, or what you could do, by playing with these toys, I'm fascinated. Like I said, I couldn't be more of a happy camper on that aspect.
So, like you mentioned earlier, this documentary has reenactments of the stories being told. And with the nature of this material that you're covering, how did you make sure everyone on set felt safe physically and mentally?
Well, for the interviewees, like I said, one was creating the set with the lamps, and then the other aspect was I had a closed set, and I think that also had a lot to do with my trauma because I knew that if I was sitting in a chair in front of a camera, I wanted to be as comfortable, as safe. I zero judgment, from others. So I had a conversation with my team, which this actually comes to play. I'll tell you guys a very which I think it's a beautiful short story, but most of my crew was straight. They were complete straight men. My DP straight, my gaffer was straight, and I had a talk with them, and I said, "Hey, we're going to start this project, but it's going to talk about a lot of gay subjects. There's going to be gay sex in it, and not the gay sex that maybe you're used to hearing. There's rape. There's I went down a list." And I said, "Are you guys okay with that? I want people who are comfortable with that, because I don't want straight people who are just grabbing onto a job just for a paycheck. I think this is more, there's more meaning to the whole thing." So everyone was on board. And I forgot, not sure if it was Jose's story or if it was one of the other stories that we asked, but at one point I was in front of the monitors and I turned to my right and my whole team was crying. There was tears falling. And it's just so powerful because I I didn't think that, at least in my head, that I know this is going to sound maybe weird, but I just didn't think that sometimes straight people had it, in their mind to see or hear a story and get emotional about someone that went through it. And I just remember tears falling. And I went up to Keelan, who was my DP, and I asked him, I said, "Hey," he goes, "this has nothing to do with any kind of being gay or lesbian. It just has to do with humanity." He goes, "This could have happened to anyone, So when I saw that, I knew for a fact that the fact of having a close set and just having the appropriate team on set, and that they were going to be respectful. Um, and then I also made sure that not necessarily we're isolated before, but I kind of kept everyone separate, like all the interviews. Like I didn't have them all meet at once. I would have times, for instance, like this interview at 9 o'clock, I had Jose, and at 12 I had someone else, but I didn't have them come in till later because I didn't want them to start mingling and then get, very caught up in the dynamic of what the other person's story was going to be. So I made sure that they were calm, they were tranquil, they came into set, they were, treated properly, that they ate something before they talked. And we also had um, one, two, we had three therapists on set. We had one for that just in case things would go wrong. There was another person who was conducting the interview. There was a therapist, and also just to be able to facilitate, any conversations are diverted from whatever needed. But yeah, so me and my team made sure that they were comfortably on the chair, that they had a beautiful set to sit on, and that there was therapists monitoring, anything that went on. So it was a very very safe set, for that sense. On the other aspect, for the actors, I talked about it. We went into very extensive details of how we wanted to shoot it. We had to show them some reference on how some of the rape scenes, were gonna be kind of reenacted. I also made sure that they felt comfortable, from day one, that there was going to be nudity, that we were not going to have, a full blown orgy on set, and they were gonna like not feel comfortable, and so we made sure that professionally everyone was taken care of. We had extensive talks with the actors, and going back to one of your guys' questions, the one another thing that was very challenging, not the biggest one, but for me was working with a kid, and his name's Elijah, and I thought it was going to be insane, because I thought I was going to have a 5-year-old or 6-year-old running around the set and not being able to control him, and I was kind of worried about that as well. But this kid is so talented, so talented. I felt like I was having conversations with an 80-year-old person when I would talk to him, because he was so focused, and he was like, I got you. I don't know if you guys saw the scene where Rick says, but I'm gay, and they do kind of like a movement, and it
Mm-hmm.
transitions over.
Yes.
Um, so I talked to Teenage Rick and I said, could you sit down with Elijah and ask him if he could mimic you, and once you guys have it, then you guys let me know, and I would film you guys. And I think it was like 5 minutes. Teenage Rick came, and he's like, "I'm ready." And I was like, "Hey, did you have a chance?" He's like, "Yeah." He says he's good. And in my head, I was like, "Oh God, we're gonna be here for like 3 hours trying to get the movement correct." And Teenage Rick sat in front of the camera, and literally Elijah sat on an apple box and was staring at him, and like right next to the camera, and we're like, cut. And so then we're like, hey Elijah, do you need some time to kind of do the movement? And he said, no, hit the record button, I'm ready. I was like, okay. He nailed it on the first try, but like his dedication, just not just him, all the actors were very, very dedicated. I was lucky enough to find some of them last minute, even though we did castings. Like Rick's mom came in, and we had seen some of her reel. And when we put her in certain outfits, and transformed her into the church lady that she was. We were like, okay, like, and she's just so powerful, and she's a beautiful soul, And for Jose's story, we had Andres and Juan Carlos, and we told them since day one, this is going to be maybe, if not one of the harshest scenes of speaking out. And they were fine with it. I think they're very professional with what they did and how they did it. Um, Even though we found a very creepy warehouse in Los Angeles that kind of mimicked San Francisco a little bit, and just being on set, you would kind of get the chills with that. But everyone was very professional. Everyone was very. We made sure that everyone felt comfortable. Also, just because we knew, Jose went to some of the scenes, just to see how it was going to be filmed. And, a lot of people who are not in cinema, when you film, you're filming a lot, obviously a lot of material. And that's not going to always be the case that it's going to end up on screen. But there was moments, that Jose was weary, just because also from a person that lived it, was kind of concerned how his story was going to be told. And we also try to, not just Jose, but everyone, like, trust a little bit in us. We are going to try to get as close as possible, but as beautiful that we could try to recreate. And we're not going to show a dirty aspect of what your trauma is, but instead we're going to try to reflect something beautiful that came out. And I think, once again, those were conversations we had to have with each individual in order for them to build a bit of trust, And so I think that's the aspect of making everyone like feel safe on set.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for sharing all of that. You also mentioned that the film included therapists who are on set. I didn't know they were doing the interviews, but that's really fascinating. So not only to do that aspect, but they were also interviewed themselves, which provided a good insight into like the mental health from different perspectives, the person going through the trauma, and then, the third party that like observes trauma and helps people deal with it. How did the contribution of the therapists shape the narrative of the documentary?
Well, there is more material that we had from the therapist that didn't make it to the final cut. Like I mentioned, I think during the creative process when I was, doing everything and thinking about all that, I was like, when I say going through my healing, um, or the beginning of my healing path, I had several conversations with my therapist, and I love my therapist. I've been with her for about 6 years now. I just had a meeting with her yesterday, and I'm always fascinated sometimes with everything that she has to tell me and offer. But I think at that time I was like a sponge to learning about a lot of mental health scenarios. I wanted to really, really heal per se. So I think, for me as a trauma survivor, I wanted to actually listen to what a lot of therapists would say. And I stumbled upon Matthias James Barker, who is one of the therapists in the film. And Matthias has a following on TikTok. He has a web page for his stuff, and he also has his Instagram. But the way he explains a lot of the trauma aspects and the components to it, and what someone might need to do, the steps to kind of start healing, caught my attention. And like I said, I think I had dabbled upon like a lot of how to heal yourself or how to begin your healing process. So when I stumbled upon Matthias, I had brought it up to the team and we talked about it, but I just knew that if we had the aspect of therapists, at one point I was going to ask my own therapist to see if she wanted to partake in it. But we ended up with Michael Pizzullo, who's also part of Impulse Group. And when I was talking to them, they were giving me so much information about how the mind works and how trauma kind of, is brought into it. And I said, if we could incorporate this into, at first I wanted more, like I said, we have more footage of them and we asked them all these questions, and there was a lot of great questions that were asked for them. They gave us such great answers. But once we actually did we kind of restructured, speaking out from a docu-series to what it is now. We knew that these three stories were kind of the best ones that were tangled up and that would do best for this kind of project. We then narrowed down to just one or two things of how it impacted more than what you needed to do to kind of go through a healing journey. But nonetheless, I think, therapists, especially like good therapists, they have so much knowledge that sometimes as humans kind of, because I've talked to one or two people who are so stubborn on therapy, like where, hey, they're like, oh, therapy's not for me. Therapy's not going to help me. Like, I'd rather do it on my own, or I'll figure out how I'm going to do it. And not that I'm trying to push therapy onto people, but I thought that it would also help from finding or from hearing from a professional what they needed to say about trauma, and maybe have that debate with themselves whether down the road they could use a therapist or not. But nonetheless, I think it brought a little bit of kind of a lot of input on what trauma and mental health in these kind of scenarios help, and we just kind of peppered it in. We didn't also want it to oversaturate it.
I think it was great. I love that the ending was just like motivating people to process their trauma and talk about it. How important do you think it is for men or people, especially within the LGBTQ plus community, to speak out about their experiences with trauma and abuse?
Oof.
Big
Yeah,
question.
it's a big question, and I think it just got me a little emotional because of my own trauma. But I think that it's very important. Um, a lot of people think that coming out is a big aspect of the gay community, but I think that's kind of just a little bit of a mask, to be honest. Because it is an important life. I mean, an important piece of their life, coming out. But what might have happened before, there's a lot of, I personally, from what I've gathered, there's a lot of sexual abuse that people don't talk about, whether it's at an early stage of life, um, or whether it's them finding out what sexually they want. Um, and I think we kind of cover ourselves with coming out is going to be liberated or liberating and our problems are going to go away. That's kind of how I view it, in the sense where, like, yeah, now we could forget about everything. I'm out and I'm going towards the world. But I think a lot of people in the community have forgotten that they were hurt in the past. And um and it sucks because also, just kind of like Jose's story, you know, they could put a blame on you because they're like, oh, you're gay or you're lesbian. You must be very hypersexual. You know, you were probably asking for this, or that's what happens because you are a very sexual person. And I think that there's the sexual part of it, and then there's the emotional part of it. And I know a lot of friends, and I don't pinpoint, but they bottle their emotions and they don't want to talk about it. They to this day, I know a lot of people in the community that they don't. So they rather recreationally wise use alcohol to cover up their stuff, and we see them, that those are the people at the bars who drink a little bit more than everyone else. And it's not just to drink, like there's more to that, like, they're drowning in their own sorrows, per se, or they're doing drugs to find an escape, or they're sleeping around with as many people as possible because that's a release of their pain. And I'm no one to judge, but I think that there is a big problem in the community, because I think that they need to heal. And if they want to go on with, drinking or doing drugs or, sleeping around, then they'll find a way of doing it in a more healthier environment than just finding an escape. And I, I I could say I was guilty of that, and that's why I say that. Um, like I said, it was trauma for me. 20 years took a lot. It fucked with my nervous system. It also fucked with the way that sometimes I would view things. Um, I also victimized myself, and that took and affected a lot of stuff. But I also did not want to talk to anyone about it, except for one or two of my close friends. And I was still kind of in a bubble where I was like, if I say something, maybe the person I like, or the guy that I like at the gym is not gonna like me because I'm tarnished or I'm tainted, or if he knows that this happened to me sexually, like, our sex life is not gonna be, the greatest. Those things cross not through just my mind. I know for a fact a lot of people in the community that hold back. Lots and lots of them. And, I applaud the people that have never gone through trauma because they have, a little bit of an advantage. They live their life a little bit freely, but there's a high percentage in our community that have gone through some crazy shit and they won't talk about it.
Yeah, well, that's why we need brave people who are willing to talk about it, share it, and then film it in a beautiful way that we can share with so many people. So thank you so much for making this documentary, for sharing your experiences and being vulnerable with us and through the film as well. Like, we really appreciate it. Like you said, this is a topic some people nail on the chalkboard kind of thing, but it's more universal than I think people are willing to admit. And so thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you.
Well, we have come to the end of our questions for you, John. We just wanted to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us, for sharing this beautiful documentary with us. So we feel very privileged to be able to watch it. How can our listeners at home who want to support Speaking Out, or connect with you in the project on the internet?
Yeah, so you could follow me on Instagram at John Solis Actor. That's my main page, and now that that it's out, I'll probably be publishing on about what it's going to be doing and where it's going. Speaking Out also has a page of Instagram. It's called at Speaking Out Documentary. You guys could follow the page. I'm pretty sure that they're going to update it with a lot of stuff from the premiere and where it's going next and what other film festivals it's going to be at, and eventually, hopefully down the road, what platform it might land on and all that stuff. So you guys could be updated on that. And then where it could be watched at this moment, I don't think it could be watched anywhere just because it's still doing its rounds. But like I said, just by following the pages, I think it's you guys could do that. And yeah, I'm glad you guys got a chance to watch it and then be one of the few people that have seen it yet. So I'm excited about that.
We're very honored.
Yes, seriously. All right, thank you, John. Everybody at home, follow those pages.
Thank you so much. Yes.
And hopefully it's coming to a streaming platform someday near you.
Yes. Soon. Thank you.
All right. Until next time, everybody at home, hydrate for lesbian Jesus.
And gay it up all over the place.
Bye.
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 And with that, we've been Big Gay Energy. If you like this episode, check out all our other episodes right here on YouTube.
Please like, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more amazing super gay content.